Butter. Does anybody else's cat like butter? All my cats have always loved butter. I don't know what it is, but they love it. I mean, you know, it's butter. I love it too, but...
Good afternoon, friends. It's Heather at Push Puppy Farm. Hope you're doing well. I'm still sick, so it's an inside day today. We're going to be processing tomatoes for tomato sauce and then putting them in the canner, as well as getting a loaf of sourdough started. So join me in the kitchen. So I've mentioned a couple times that I have been keeping tomatoes in the freezer over the course of the season because it's easier to, I have 3 bags here, to do that so you have a large amount to work with when it comes time to process your tomatoes. And the great thing about freezing them whole is that then when they thaw, the skins slip right off. So it's really nice. It saves an extra step. I am going to be making just plain tomato sauce. So all that's going in these jars other than tomatoes is the required amount of lemon juice. And then we're be canning them because that way I can just have a blank slate when I'm using this, and I can make it in any recipes that I want. So this is going to be a slow cook so that it gets down to a nice consistency. But other than that, other than monitoring it, it's not really a whole lot of work because I am not using a food mill. I'm going to be getting the seeds out just through a strainer. So with a ladle is pretty simple. And even though there's potential to have a couple seeds in there, I'm not too worried about that. All right, so first thing I'm going to do, taking these tomatoes out, and then just popping them in the pan here and taking off the skins. Now I'm going to save these skins because you can, these are still very cold. I took them out of the freezer yesterday, left them on the counter, and they mostly thawed, but they're still pretty cold. You can dehydrate these skins and use them, grind them into a powder to use in recipes like soups and stuff for some really good tomato flavor. So another nice thing about this freezing method is that a lot of the water content in the tomatoes comes out in the bag when they thaw. So it makes the process of cooking them down a lot faster. Now, I'm not too worried if I have a couple of skins in here. I'm going to be using my immersion blender to puree this sauce in the pot after it cooks for a while. And that'll take care of any tiny fragments of skins that remain. So there's some of the water left in this bag. Just going to dump that. All right, moving on to the next bag. Oh, these are still very, very cold. Now, normally people say you should only use paste tomatoes to make sauces, etc. But I find that a nice combo of tomatoes, and I've got a lot of different varieties here, make a really lovely sauce. So I'm not a stickler for that tomato, the paste tomato thing. I do have some paste tomatoes in here, but there's also a nice variety of other tomatoes. Like this is a big Berkeley tie-dye, Berkeley pink tie-dye. All right, I'm gonna finish up this process and then we'll see where we're at for the next step. Okay, so we've got all the tomatoes out of their skins, and I'm saving those skins. Like I said, I'm gonna dehydrate them. That's gonna take a long time because there's still
stuff on them. But you can see there's a ton of liquid still in here. So I'm actually going to drain that off. And the reason I'm doing that is it means less cooking time. Plus, some of the seeds are going to go with it. Okay. Now there's still quite a bit actually. I don't want to get rid of all of the liquid, obviously, because I don't want the tomatoes to burn, but they will still release some liquid, and we won't suffer for not having it take as long to cook some of this liquid off. All right, so we're gonna get this on the cooktop and get it started. Okay, we're gonna get this guy started. I will bring it up to a boil first. Then I'm going to use the immersion blender, blend it all up, and then we'll let it boil or simmer longer to get rid of more of the water content. Okay, because I have an induction cooktop, this came to a boil very quickly. So I'm going to go ahead and use my immersion blender here. We're just going to blend all this up so it's nice and pureed, and then we'll just let it continue to simmer while it cooks off a lot of this liquid. Okay, that looks lovely. It just needs to simmer, but it's a beautiful consistency, so we just want it to get a lot thicker. In the meantime, we are going to put together the dough for a loaf of sourdough. Now, I know a lot of people make multiple loaves at the same time, but with Dylan off at college, there's only 3 of us, and I have a wheat allergy, so it's really only Mike and Aiden who eat the sourdough. People always ask me why I make it if I can't eat it. I make it because I love to make it. It's super fun, and my family loves it. So, you know, I don't care that I can't eat it. I'm not missing out, because honestly, the way I feel, how sick I get if I have wheat, makes me very clearly fine missing out on this. So this recipe I will link below from my website, but I cobbled together this recipe from a number of sources, and at this point it's working for me. It's always worked for me, and I don't want to change it up. I've only been doing sourdough for about 2 years, and I haven't really ventured out into making things different other than like using, I make sourdough banana bread, sourdough pancakes, all that kind of stuff, and using the discard to make things like crackers, etc. But I haven't made the bread differently, like adding rye or whatever. Haven't messed with that yet. So what I'm going to give you today is just my basic sourdough bread recipe. So I use a scale. I find that when I'm baking, using weight instead of volume is way better. It's just more consistent. It is more accurate, and so makes things come out every time. All right, and then I have a huge bowl, which I'm going to tare to 0, because that way I can measure how much I need of each of these items right in there, and I just 0 it back out each time. Okay, so the first thing, and this one's done in grams, this recipe. First thing we're gonna do is all-purpose flour, and we are putting in 250 grams of that. So I'm just reading my scale until I get to 250 grams, and then I'm going to 0 it back out so that I can start the next one. 241, all right, 250. Okay, so we got 250 grams of AP flour, and then we're going to do 100 grams of whole wheat flour. So I'm going to 0 my scale back out. That's 73. Okay, 100 grams whole wheat flour. And then we're going to use bread flour, and we're going to do 125 grams of that. There we go. All right. Okay, so that's it for the flours. Next thing we're gonna add is 10 grams of salt. And I'm just using pink Himalayan sea salt because that happens to be what I have in my salt cellar. But whatever works. So we're doing 10 grams. Okay, so now we're gonna have 100 grams of fed sourdough starter. And I've got my starter right here. I fed this morning and let it rise. It went from here to here. So it is fed and bubbly. And we're gonna put 100 grams of it into the bowl. All right. And then the final thing is 325 grams of water. All right, so now that I've gotten that, we can take it off of the scale and we're just gonna mix this up. I will get my hands in here, but I'm gonna do the initial mix with a spoon. Okay, so the dough, when you first start, is really raggedy, and that's totally fine. That's expected. All right, so now I'm gonna get my hands in here. And what I'm doing now is just incorporating all of those ingredients together, making sure I pick up all the flours off the bottom. And see, it's very, very sticky. Don't worry, that's the way it's supposed to be. All right, so now that we've got ourselves incorporated here, I'm gonna leave this dough to sit under a damp tea towel for 30 minutes to autolyze. That means to have the sourdough bacteria get super active and start doing what yeast would do in this case. Okay, so we are done with the autolyze segment, and now we are moving on to 4 stretch and folds. And this is pretty easy. All you're doing is basically kneading the dough with this stretching and folding, and doing it once, letting it sit for 30 minutes, doing it again, sit for 30 minutes. You do that 4 times total. We're gonna cover it with that same towel and let it sit until tonight around bedtime. That will be its bulk rise. At that point, we're gonna shape the dough, put it in the Banneton, and then we're gonna wrap it up and stick it in the fridge overnight, and we'll bake it in the morning. So let's do our first stretch and fold. Okay, so stretch and fold's pretty easy. I like to do it with wet hands because the dough is very sticky, and this helps. So you'll see it's still kind of raggedy, and it doesn't have a whole lot of gluten activation yet. So it's very stretchy, but it doesn't have a whole lot of elasticity. So I pull, stretch, and fold it, and I'm putting tension in the dough. All right, now that's pretty tight. We're gonna cover it, come back in 30 minutes, and do it again.
So it's kind of a bummer. I got 3 cups out of 3 bags, 3-gallon bags of tomatoes, but I'm going to use this tonight. That's why I decided not to go ahead and can it. I'm going to make a chicken and mozzarella and tomato sauce dinner. I'm not sure how I'm going to do it yet, but those are my ideas. It smells lovely and I would love to use it. So I'm going to go ahead and use this tonight, which means I'm not going to bother canning it. So, note to self for next year. I mean, this was a good tomato year, and I'm really pleased with it. But that means I want to plant a whole lot more tomatoes next year. And maybe not so many cherry tomatoes, because I use those, but definitely don't cook with them. So, anyway, notes on that for next year. But I have one more stretch and fold to do. Then I'm going to cover this up, and it will do its bulk rise. And then this evening, before I go to bed, we'll come back and I'll show you what it looks like, and we'll shape the dough and get it ready for tomorrow's bake. So you can see it's a very tight ball. It's got a lot of tension on it. And now we're just going to cover this puppy and see what it looks like. Hopefully it will have doubled by this evening before bedtime. So here's the finished loaf, looking great. It's nice and cooled off now. And it's making that sound that you want to hear from sourdough. So I'm assuming that it's good as usual. I'm not going to cut into it because I'm not the one that eats it. And I want it to stay as fresh as long as possible. So I apologize for not talking in the earlier part here with the whole baking thing. I had lost my voice this morning when I got up. Can't stop sneezing and stuff, so it's affecting my voice. Anyway, and pardon my eyes are all droopy. They just won't stop running. This cold is really kicking my butt. So what you saw was I took the loaf out, I took the dough out of the refrigerator, and then I turn it upside down onto parchment paper. That's because that does not burn in the oven. And I used what's called a bread lamb, and that is used to cut into the loaf so that steam can escape. So you'll see right here is where I cut it, and this is the amount that it opened. So if I didn't do that, if I didn't make any cuts,
it would find its own way and it would burst out the side somewhere, because the first 20 minutes of cooking is basically steaming. So I set my Dutch oven cold into the oven and I preheat it to 550 degrees. Once that's preheated, I put the bread, the dough into it, put the lid on, set the temperature for 485 for 20 minutes. Then when that goes off, take the lid off and it's 465 for another 20 minutes and then it's done. And so it steams for the first part and then it browns and continues to cook on the second part. And that's it. And so now the starter that I have left over is in the fridge because I'm not going to be using it for a couple days. If it stays on the counter, it needs to be fed every day. Otherwise, you can leave it in the fridge, which really slows down the fermentation, and it can be in there for weeks or months. This is the same starter I've had for the past 2 years, almost 3 years now. And it's great. I thought I killed it when we were under construction because it sat in the refrigerator for about 3 months without being used. It did form a layer of what's called hooch on the top. It's this gray liquid. It smells super alcohol-y. All I had to do was pour that off, mix in some fresh flour and water, set it out at room temperature, and it started to grow again. So sourdough is a really magical thing. All right, thanks so much for hanging out with me today, you guys. I know it wasn't garden content, but it's the best I can do while I'm sick. Tomorrow, I am going to go check on things at the farm so we can go check and see how the seedlings are doing and make sure all the irrigation is still set up. And then I'm going to go get some small bags of compost, just plain compost, and put them in the front garden beds where I need to sow some carrots and radish, as well as go ahead and plant our garlic. And then in a couple days, what are you doing, Ray Ray? No, you can't. That's not for you. She wants to eat the sourdough. But here's what she really loves. Come here. Butter. Does anybody else's cat like butter? All my cats have always loved butter. I don't know what it is, but they love it. I mean, it's butter. I love it too, but it seems weird that cats would like it. So anyway, the ranunculus and tulips should be shipping on the 28th, which is tomorrow. And we should get them in a couple days, and then we can get those in the ground once I pre-sprout the ranunculus, but at least the tulips can go in. And then I think we'll be done for planting for spring. So I'm looking forward to that. I am ready to start to wind down. It's been a long season, and I'm ready to wrap it up. So thanks for hanging out with me today, you guys, and yesterday. And I hope you have a wonderful time in your garden, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.